here to unpack all this with me is one of the more prolific, prominent journalists on this beat. He's been covering it for years. I've read his stuff for a long time. He is the curator of The Dissenter. Please welcome to the show, Kevin Gosztola. Kevin, how are you?
Hey, hello. It's good to be with you today.
Thanks for being here. So there's a lot to unpack. Let's start at day one. Day one's in the past. That was yesterday. But let's kind of give a brief summary of what happened there, and then kind of get to present. So in day one, they made the case. It was the defense for him making their case. They said that they pointed out that there was the plan to assassinate him, which, boy, did that get virtually no coverage when it was dropped. But they brought that up. They brought up the fact that he would not be given a fair trial in the United States because, why would they start now? And then they brought up just all kinds of other factors. Could you sort of just summarize what were the main components of day one?
Yeah, and then I don't want to take for granted that people may not actually understand what was happening here. This is a permission for an appeal. So they go before the High Court of Justice in the UK, Assange and his team, and they say, we think that the government, actually there was two things happening here, which is kind of confusing. They were appealing that the UK government authorized extradition, and then they were also appealing that the lower district court had authorized extradition. And so they go before the High Court of Justice and they put these grounds for appeal before them. And all of them are very substantial, in my opinion. And what they do is they pick apart the district court's ruling, or this district judge, her name was Vanessa Baretzer. And it's kind of complicated in the way that we talk about her, because usually we would say that she got everything wrong. Like, you would think if they were at this stage appealing that she got everything wrong and it was a horrible, horrible decision. But there was this silver lining to it, in the sense that even though she said that Julian Assange was not a journalist and he didn't have these rights that should be protected for the actions that he engaged in, she believed that if he was extradited to the United States, it would be oppressive for mental health reasons, that his mental health condition would be so poor that he would try to commit suicide while in U.S. detention or in a U.S. prison. And then that got litigated over the last several years, and eventually Julian Assange lost. And so that's why we're here today, still talking about an extradition case. But this was an opportunity, a first opportunity for Assange to basically challenge the bulk of that district court decision that got so much wrong. And so we're talking about things that are really in the legal weeds, and I don't want to overwhelm people. This is not like some, like legal schnauzer show or whatever, where we talk about the different statutes and different provisions of the law with like very fine, minute. But the treaty does say that you're not supposed to extradite for political offenses, and espionage has traditionally been considered a political offense. And the reason being is, if you just think about it, anyone that's usually accused of espionage against their government is doing it, it's directed at the government. And that act of espionage might not be a crime in various other countries. It depends on what you do. So because it is so politically charged, usually governments don't extradite people back to the country that is claiming they committed treason or espionage against the government. A lot of times in that scenario, you're talking about the risk of torture for that person. There's a provision that says if you're targeted for your political opinions, you should not be extradited. That's a big part of the proceedings yesterday, that Julian Assange engaged in political actions. They were motivated by his political opinions, and that the U.S. government has indicted him. In particular, we're talking here about the Trump officials at the Justice Department, and Jeff Sessions was the attorney general at the time that he was indicted, and later Bill Barr presided over it, so that those so that this extradition basically for against Julian Assange was targeting him because he engaged in these political actions, had these political opinions. So they say very clearly, this is a politically motivated case. And then, like you said, you raised the issue of the CIA allegedly plotting to kill him. That was brought in. That's fresh evidence. As far as the timeline goes, none of that was available to the district court from Yahoo News until now. And it's remarkable. I know Status Coup spent some time on this yesterday. I was following that because Jordan had actually invited me onto the show, and I had a previously scheduled press conference or rally in Chicago that I had to go to speak about Julian Assange. The government actually says of this article that they believe that the authors of it, they try to discredit it by saying that the authors of it are people who support Julian Assange.
Oh my God.
And it's kind of funny because the authors on it are Michael Isikoff, a journalist named Sean Naylor, and another journalist named Zach Dorfman. And they might be against indicting Julian Assange and prosecuting him and bringing him to this country, but so are 90 to 95% of journalists around the world at this point, because they recognize what it's going to do. And then there are various degrees of support, right? Like, how far are they willing to go? We quibble and jostle and pester them because, for the most part, they aren't regularly raising this matter. It's like they do the token thing, they do the bare minimum, and then they get on with their lives and they say, oh, we checked the box. We showed that we are against this. And now we get to pretend like that's all we really need to do in order to address or resolve the matter. But yeah, I'd say like those were the big things about day one. Day one was that they're raising all of this. They're saying things like he could be exposed to the death penalty. They're saying things like there's the fact that the judge didn't appropriately acknowledge that state crimes were exposed by WikiLeaks. That's a good point to close on here before I end this response to you for day one, because they point out that, we were exposing drone strikes that killed civilians. WikiLeaks did that. Torture was exposed, that there were war crimes that were exposed. That in particular, a very big example is that there was a person named Khalid al-Masri who was abducted by the CIA. The CIA tortured him. And then he took his case to the European Court of Human Rights. And before the European Court of Human Rights, he showed them cables that WikiLeaks had published, which came from Chelsea Manning. And these cables had evidence that helped confirm the role of the CIA, or the role, of Macedonia, because that was who he took to the European Court of Human Rights. He couldn't actually take the CIA to the European Court of Human Rights, but he took the European country that was involved, or they took the European state that was involved in being the oppressor of him, of engaging in this act. And he ended up winning. He won before the European Court of Human Rights, and he used these diplomatic cables. To me, the biggest thing about the prosecution is that they do this thing that's very convenient to me, where they try to murk the waters so that they can ensure that Julian Assange will be extradited. So, for example, the judge might ask them about something that would be an issue of fact, and they'll say, oh, you know what, actually, like, Julian Assange was involved in telling Chelsea Manning that he would help her access military computers that didn't belong to her. And you look at the indictment and it'll say, well, that's not actually what she's charged with. That's not what the indictment says. It says that they accused Julian Assange of trying to help her move anonymously through the computer systems so that the US military wouldn't know that she was accessing the documents. It wasn't that, oh, now she's going to go get on these computers that don't belong to her. I don't even know what that means, because she doesn't own computers. They're the military computers. But this is what the prosecutor said to the high court judge. And then what happens is the high court justice or the judges, they get confused and they're like, I don't really know what's right. The defense says one thing, the prosecutors say another thing. Let's just extradite him and we'll let the judge at the trial figure it out. Like, what's the fact? Like, was he helping her hide on the computers, or was he trying to steal the computers? We don't know. And then, like, that's what happens. Like, they're intentionally making it difficult for them to have clarity and fully understand what's happening with the case. So to me, that's what stands out. But then also there is that fact that they're just blatantly saying he's not an ordinary journalist, or he's not a responsible journalist is one term that they throw out there. And to just basically deny this whole idea that, you know, he was engaged in these standard news gathering activities. And then taking offense, I was really struck too, taking offense to this idea that the US government would lie or be deceitful when telling the high court or just even the lower court about the case, that there are certain things that are being hidden, and that this case could be politically motivated. Like, the prosecutors took this attitude before the high court that it's extremely offensive for them to suggest that the US, since they have a treaty with the UK that allows them extradition, that they would somehow abuse it by telling lies about people that they're trying to extradite. But, you know, they have to recognize that that happens. It's not like every single person who's ever been requested has been extradited to the United States. There are people, they may be few, but there are people who have prevailed in their extradition cases. And in one way or another, it was probably because the UK courts could see through what the US government was asking.